This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 729 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. Before getting into the trends this week, I want to remind you about FanDuel Face-Off. FanDuel Face-Off is where you compete in quick, fun games against other real people for real cash. It has all sorts of games that you're familiar with, like Home Run Derby, Wheel of Fortune, puzzle and strategy games, and there's more on the way. Contests are action-packed and last between 2 to 5 minutes, so you can play on your couch, waiting in line, during a commercial break, wherever and on your schedule. Plus, you can practice for free anytime. Whether it be head-to-head, multiplayer, or larger tournaments, FanDuel Face-Off has something for you. Plus, in most contests, you'll be matched against players of a similar skill level, so you're never totally overmatched, even as a beginner. Face-Off is also tied to your FanDuel account and wallet, so you can easily use your daily fantasy funds or sportsbook winnings in the app. Visit FanDuel.com/faceoff or download the FanDuel Face-Off app in the Apple App Store today to get in the game. Age and location restrictions apply, void where prohibited. See FanDuel.com/faceoff-terms for terms and conditions. JuJu Smith-Schuster has been really good in fantasy football since about week 5. Post week 5, he has 4 top 10 performances. He's been a top 20 wide receiver in 5 of 7 completed games. I say completed because he had that concussion against Jacksonville in the middle of the second quarter back in week 10. But since week 5, JuJu's been a very firm wide receiver 2 in fantasy football. And that includes the game where he was concussed. It just feels like his season is sort of flying under the radar because it hasn't been very consistent. But he's been good. If you were curious, no, the Falcons didn't get any more pass heavy with Desmond Ridder this week. They ended up running 69 plays while trailing this past weekend, and 55 of those plays came while trailing by 10 or more points. They still had, despite all that, just about a 44% pass rate. That was lower than their 2 previous games. I'm not optimistic about things with Ridder over the next 2 weeks, even with the matchup against the Cardinals in week 17. Romeo Doubs returned to the Packers lineup in week 15. He played for the first time since week 9. He ended up seeing an 18% target share on just 10 routes run. Now, fortunately for anyone with Christian Watson, he still ran a lot of routes for the Packers. He ran around on 31 of a possible 33 Aaron Rodgers dropbacks, and his target share was over 21%. That's right in line with where he's been over the last month. We know the way that Watson scores fantasy points is going to be volatile. But he's still someone that you want in your fantasy lineup, not just because of his upside, but because the Packers get the Dolphins and the Vikings over their next 2 games. Now, I don't want to hurt a guy when he's down, but I thought this next trend was kind of funny. Back in week 8, so about halfway through the season, I had a trend about Jacoby Myers, and how he had seen double-digit PPR performances in all of his games up until that point. Well, since talking about him on this show and giving him love for his consistency, he's completely gone in the opposite direction. He had 6 straight games of 10-plus points to start the year. He's now had 5 straight games where he's failed to get 10 PPR points. He's been someone that I've noticed has stayed high in rankings week in and week out, but it just hasn't been justified. Hopefully he turns things around, especially after his mistake at the end of that week 15 game. You always want someone to turn things around after something like that. In Darren Waller's return last week, he actually played fewer snaps than Foster Moreau, and he only saw a 9% target share. But he was out there running routes. He ran 27 routes, which was 3rd highest on the team and 9 more than Moreau. I'd expect both his snap share and route participation to rise week over week as he gets back into things. But it's important to know that his fantasy day was absolutely saved by a touchdown in week 15. We had seen Austin Hooper play more than Chig Okonkwo in that Tennessee offense, but that flipped in week 15. Okonkwo led the Titans tight end group in snap rate, and he ran 1 more route than Austin Hooper. With Treylon Burks out, they've been able to deploy their tight ends more as pass catchers. We'll have to see if that continues when Burks is healthy, but Okonkwo has now seen an 18% target share per game over his last 3, and he continues to lead tight ends in yards per route run. He's legit. You can't bench Jerick McKinnon at this point. It's hard to predict game script, which is what was happening last week in liking Isaiah Pacheco more than McKinnon. And then the Texans stayed close with Kansas City. That allowed the Chiefs to continue throwing, and that benefits Jerick McKinnon. He had a 19.5% target share, and he's now seen a 15% target share per game rate over his last 6. He's seen 8 or more targets in 4 of his last 7 games. Austin Eckler leads all running backs with 8 games of 8 or more targets. Christian McCaffrey has 6 of those games. But then it's McKinnon and Ramondre Stevenson. They're next on the list. And it's insanely impressive because McKinnon's done that over his last 7. It's obvious at this point, but you have to start him. I haven't said an update on this in a while, but the Bears currently have a 38% pass rate. And I'm defining that simply by pass attempts divided by total pass attempts and rush attempts. Since 2011, the lowest pass rate in the NFL has been 42.3% from the 2020 Ravens. Which means this Bears team, despite being a losing team, which we'd expect them to throw a little bit more, this Bears team is by far the most run-heavy team that we've seen over the last 11 years. A really good sign for Kenneth Walker last Thursday coming off that injury was the fact that he was involved as a receiver. That's been an on and off thing for him this year. And with him being hurt, it was unclear if they would use him or Travis Homer more in the passing game. But it was him. He ran 30 routes, which tied Marquise Goodwin for third most on Seattle, and Travis Homer was at 12. Walker had a 12% target share. It was a tough matchup against the 49ers, but you can fire him up confidently here in Week 16. The last trend this week is about Trevor Lawrence. He's been amazing in fantasy football over the last month and a half. And as I've talked about on past 15 transaction shows, the Jags have a tough fantasy playoff schedule. They faced Dallas last week, and then they get the Jets and Texans over their final 2 games. Those are bottom 5 matchups and adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. But Trevor Lawrence came through in Week 15. He was a top 5 quarterback against Dallas. And he's now hit a top 6 quarterback performance in 4 of his last 5. He's averaging over 21 fantasy points per game since Week 6. With the quarterback position a hot mess right now, even in these tough matchups, it can still make plenty of sense to start Trevor Lawrence. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out lateround.com. Otherwise, appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.